good morning or good afternoon, depending which part of the world you are. And today is our last day of this series of decolonization and this process that we've been journeying together. And the first part of today, we're going to be having a dialogue, a presentation with Benedito Medrado. Thank you, Benedito, for being here with us today. And then we're going to take a break, and then the next part of it would be basically looking back to the journey that we've taken together, what has come up, what could be missing, and what would be the next steps, because it's not the end of the story, it's simply the end of these series, and the work will still continue in the different regions and different parts of our organizations. And is there anything else you would like to add, Yoni or Magali?
Just briefly, good day, everybody. I know we're a small group, but as usual, we try to share the guidelines that we use for the collab, our space for sharing with the members and partners, that this is a safe, inclusive, and respectful space for a positive learning and engaging experience. So, as you know, be respectful, take responsibility, and have a good time. So that's all. We are recording. If you have an issue with that, let us know, or just disconnect. But we have been recording the series from the beginning for learning purposes. So I think that's it for the interest. And Nontokozo, our facilitator for the day, will continue navigating our experience today.
Thank you. So I'm going to introduce Benedito Medrado. Is a reference for the work on men and masculinities in Brazil, a professor of social psychology at the University of Pernambuco, with a PhD and research work on gender issues and masculinities. He is founding member of the Feminist Center and Gender Masculinities, and was also one of the founders of Instituto Papai. So I'm just gonna pass it on to you. Thank you for being here. Muchas gracias.
Once again, good morning everyone. It's a bit strange, this way of communicating by Zoom, but this is what we have, so let's make the most of it. I really liked the way we started with these breakout rooms, small groups, even if I would have liked to stay for a bit longer because I was just getting to know Noe and Clara, but well, that's the way it is, So my wish is that soon we will be able to be together, like face to face, to connect and to talk. Not bringing so much knowledge, but bringing a lot of doubts and bringing a lot of experiences to share. And by saying this, it's, well, the way to start, not only by thanking Magali, Yoni, Nontokozo, everyone who has organized. I'm mentioning Magali and Yoni because I know them personally, like face to face. And I would really like to have this possibility, talking, creating more dialogue from this perspective. So the beginning is to say thank you. And I'm sorry, because I'm going to make a summary of the summary of the summary of some issues that will connect me to the whole topic of decolonization. I'm going to talk a bit more about that soon. So the idea is to connect with different authors, different dialogues, authors that are talking about different concepts. Some people mention the word decolonization, some anti-colonization, some speak about decolonization. But anyway, there are different ways of connecting to this same dialogue and focusing specifically on, well, different approaches. Vivian Matias, a researcher, just wait, let me share my screen, see if you can see it. can you allow me to share my screen? It reads that I'm not allowed yet, because it can help like to see the words that I'm speaking on the screen. Just let me see if I can share. I don't know who is the one who should enable, who has the power to, it's me. I have enabled you, so you should be able to share your screen now. Okay, let me see. Okay, can you see my screen? Oh yeah, is it working?
perfecto.
Yes, good. Yeah, perfect. Okay, it's in Portuguese because I didn't have enough time. I mean, I was organizing a national seminar 2 weeks ago that involved activists, researchers talking about masculinities as well. So I was devoting all my time to organize this seminar. And then I was sick next week. So anyway, it's in Portuguese, but I'm going to make my presentation in, let's say, Spanish, half Portuguese, or let's see what comes out. So this is my attempt. This is the title that I tried to write. It's something that is not fully developed, but it's like a starting point, reflections about men and masculinities from thinking about the counter-colonial technologies and technologies of knowing and doing as well. So let's go little by little. I will just drop some ideas in. So I already did a brief introduction. What Nontokozo said about my training. My training is related to the academic training on the one hand, the scientific research and activism as well. I worked in an NGO, Instituto Papai, that exists since 1997. Then I worked in the public Federal University of Brazil, which is a national university, the University of Pernambuco, where there is a group of researchers and activists working and studying about gender and masculinities from a feminist perspective. From the very beginning, they've been working on that. I'm part of MenEngage Brazil. And as part of that, I'm part of MenEngage Latin America. So I say that I'm in Brazil, but I need to say that now I'm speaking from a specific region in Brazil that I think it would be easier for you to think in a metaphoric way. Northeast of Brazil, it would be as if it were the Brazilian Latin America. So it's a region with specific problems of development and political issues as well, very much related to poverty questions and other structural questions and problems as well. So when I talk about Brazil as a whole, I mean, the size of it is continental, not only in the geographic, from a geographic manner, but from a cultural point of view as well. So Brazil is has a lot of diversity. So now I'm talking about this region, the northeast of Brazil. As I was saying before, then my dialogue, or today's presentation to share with you, was with Vivian Matias dos Santos. She's a researcher. She is also from Brazil. And she has a very specific way to organize the discussions about decolonization. And she proposes this idea of counter-colonialism, or it's a big concept that could include decolonization within it. So she's trying to focus on what there is in common among the different approaches and not the specificities. And that's why she's using this kind of large or encompassing term to talk about the perspective that she calls counter-colonial. And she has talked to different authors that you will see. I wrote down here on the screen. So Luciana Balestrin, Maria Lugones from Argentina, but she's also, she's living in New York. And she's working from there. Oyerumik from Nigeria, Silvia Cusicanqui from Bolivia, Nibel Quijani from Peru, Nelson Maldonado Torres from Puerto Rico, and Ramondo Sobris from Puerto Rico as well. He's a professor from university as well. So these are some of the people with whom I create dialogues with their texts as well as a possibility to build not a theoretical perspective or closed perspective, but to raise questions. And I think that that's what connects me the most to these counter-colonial ideas. She's not proposing this as an affirmation, as a statement. She's saying something negative, like kind of against something else. The dialogues, the criticism, the breaking up with what has been established before. And some of those authors talk about their concerns, and they say that let's not create a new way of colonizing knowledge. We are not talking about saints, we're not talking about churches, we're not talking about big thinkers, no, we are talking about people who are just questioning this status quo. They are just showing the way in which we should get more knowledge. And I think that that's very interesting, not to try and find more churches to resort to, not to try and find any safe spots, but to try and find questions. Am I doing okay? Is it Benedito? Benedito, I'm sorry. They are saying here in the chat, yes, you can pose questions. No, but the screen doesn't move. I mean, the slides are not moving. I will move to the next one. This is just to show you some of the names, some of the authors, with whom or from whom I wanted to present some ideas. So over here, now we start with, this new perspective, anti or counter-colonial, to start talking about masculinities. Some of these people that I mentioned are not having a direct approach on masculinities. They talk about the basis for a criticism that is counter-colonial, about power, about culture. So what I do is to get a closer approach and try and think about not only the research that has already been conducted, but the actions or the proposals, directly working with men from a counter-colonial perspective. And I think that that's the greatest challenge that we have. Benedito? Yes, but you're still on the first slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, for me, things are moving. That's why I thought that things were moving. The slides were, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thanks for letting me know.
Okay, it's now passing. Yes. Okay, sorry. I was seeing them pass. Sorry. Okay, I talked about this, from where I'm talking from, who I talk to. These are the names that I was mentioning. And now the approach of a proposal of counter-colonial for men's and masculinities. So the first point is that in order to offer an analysis on masculinities, I've said this for a long time, but we need to radicalize our critique about the masculinities that are holding the patriarchal order in our society. We need to look to these buildings not as a starting point, but as objects of research. We are always talking about sexuality from dissident sexualities. When we're talking about gender identity, I think that here, this is a first invitation to come from a counter-colonial perspective, to think about the place where power is built as an object of research and critique and discussion. So beyond speaking about gender identity, that are not the normative. But I was also thinking about cis normativity as a problem. This is a very important, interesting point, which is to think the global as normal and to question that, and not to look into the effects of this power. So the power of heterosexuality create suffering, oppression, repression over some people, but we also need to talk about the bodies that create this pain in their connection with the power. That's why when we talk about the generic men as a subject and the masculinity as the social part, we talk about cisgender men and heterosexual men, but we don't think about this as a specific, but as a generalization. And this would be the first point to think about countercolonial. We also need to develop a critical read that recognizes the process of colonization in America and Afro-America. So we need to acknowledge that we need to think that when we are talking about generic men and generic masculinity, here in America, we are talking about men and white men and masculinities. So we need to recognize territory and memory when we are talking about building identities and positions of the subjects in our countries. We need to talk from this perspective of the history of the building of territories and the memory we've built, and not only to understand that racial issues, it's been a technology created to organize and order the colonization processes. And this is quite complex because they are very subtle the way they are organized. They are institutionalized. There are very few ways to look into them because we are so used to looking in these perspectives that we don't recognize them when we are using them. And here's the invitation that Vivian Matias does to think about the countercolonial feminists. She makes a differentiation between colonialism and coloniality. This differentiation, I think, is quite important because when we talk about colonialism, we talk about the history that happened at some point in time and the production of power over the territories of America. That is the process of colonization. But what Vivian is saying, and also the other authors I mentioned, is that our ways of colonization are still going on. And I think we talked about this in the previous series, about the ways of keeping the processes of colonization. And to those processes and these technologies, she calls decoloniality. She plays a little bit with the words, but showing that coloniality, it's connected from different points of this network with a lot of institutional activations that keep these bodies stuck to the process of colonialism. And here I'm talking about the security institutions, the public institutions of education, and the health institutions. These are the three kind of institutions she looked into to think about the processes of decoloniality. But also the daily life, the church, the family, all these other institutions that have this colonial view that is built within this perspective of Vivian Matias. It is produced and reaffirmed in some dichotomies that she's going to call modernity and coloniality, the nature and culture, the subject and the object, the holy and the profane, women and men, and there is where she gets to civilized and primitive, to human and non-human, which is fundamental for the processes of coloniality. And in most countries in South America, but especially in Brazil, the difference between white and non-white. In my country, I'm recognized as white, although in other territories, maybe I wouldn't be called like this, but this is from the perspective of the territory where I am, in the way the memory and the ideas were built on the building of the bodies. Today, we're talking a lot about this issue. We used to think about this as the perspective of recognizing the violence, but we're trying to do a change, which is an affirmative perspective. And we have perspective about people that define themselves as Black people, for example, or Bardas. And this is a category that in Brazil are opening doors to occupy certain posts. Well, I couldn't explain it right now because we don't have enough time, but to understand that today, to define oneself as Black person opens the doors for rights. But there are some corruptions, let's say, between comas, of people that are trying to get this right. And to recognize myself as a white person from a critical perspective and thinking about the privileges I have from this position, although subjectively there could be doubts about this. But to think public relations, we need to define ourselves in some way. If we are talking about a counter-colonial perspective, we need to recognize that we all have a point, a place where we are standing in a power network, and to understand which are the limitations as well of that network. Oh, I think I've used most of the time. So I'm going to wrap up in 5 minutes so that we can keep on talking about some doubts and issues. Okay. This is to show the memories, the memory of the history. This is an image to understand the building of the family in Brazil. Jean-Baptiste Debré did this picture between 1834 and 39. He produced this work of art. And the mission that he was at in 1816 to 1817, here in the first part of the image, in the line, we have a white man, heterosexual, proprietarian, and then we have a Black woman and a white woman. I'm talking from the first point and the last point. So we have a black man wearing weapons that is protecting the family of the patriarchal. And then we have some young men, black men, that is also following this path. This is an artistic expression that reproduces construction from colonialism, but it's still reproduced nowadays in the Brazilian society in the processes of technology of coloniality. But this is not very well known story in Brazil. In the 70s and 80s in Brazil, we had a concept that was almost like an attempt, a colonial attempt to hide the process of colonialism, saying that we are a mixed country, a plural country, where there are Europeans, Black people, indigenous people, a lot of people that are mixed, and that in most people will say, I have a mix, I have a bit of white, a bit of black, and so this creates this mixed perspective. And this is a tool of coloniality because it hides these processes and these stories that most of the times we don't even recognize. We even have an act in Brazil that was passed a few years ago that makes schools mandatory to teach the history of colonialism. So this is a very new thing. It's an act that is not still institutionalized, and it's an act that forces all schools in the country, and even though it's still not established, it creates an awareness, because if there's a law that is making people talk about this, it's because it didn't used to be like that. So it's not how situations changed, it's to recognize how it was before, the processes, the violence, in order to be able to think about the changes after that. And we're doing the things at the same time. That is why it's so complex. Something that I like very much, and I'm going to finish with this, and it helps me think about these perspectives about the effects and the strategies of coloniality that are produced on men. One is Mara Viveros, who is a feminist anthropologist. She's from Colombia. I recommend if we could have her with us in some opportunity. I'm going to send you the link so that you can share it. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. in Brazil, we're going to have her in a webinar, in a virtual webinar, where she'll be exposing her ideas and the ideas she wrote in this book, The Colors of Masculinity, and trying to think the experiences of Black masculinities, not as something specific, but as a different debate. A debate that needs more complexity in the way we look at it. And we cannot say it's one type of masculinity. She thinks that we need to change our lens in order to think the Black masculinities, and not that it's a specific one of a general masculinity. Okay, I can share with you other ideas and possibilities, but just to finish, okay, I'm trying to stop this now. Okay. These are some of the starting points that I'm using to think about men and masculinity and gender in general from a counter-colonial perspective. One of the things has been to think of the borders. There's an author I like very much, Gloria Samidu. Probably you've read something by her. She is a very interesting woman from Mexico, which worked a lot in the United States. And she has critical views in the way how we produce ideas. And she calls it the borderland. That is to say, a path of the border lines to think about these changes. And it is in these territories the concept of intersectionality helps a lot. These are some of the remarks I wanted to express. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Benedito. That was very intriguing. And I think maybe if it's possible, I don't know if it's only me to go back to the slide with the names of the authors, maybe just a little bit, just for people to see the names of the authors. And I think that's important. And we can have it on screen. And also, yes, thank you. There it is. Great, thank you. And at the same time, if there's any questions, we're going to open for questions from the floor. If you can just raise your hand or just unmute yourself and then ask the question. And just remember that Benedict doesn't have to have all the answers. This is not about having answers. It's also about just posing those questions, and also anybody else can answer to those questions from our group as well.
And just one more thing as well, because I was not there present in the previous sessions, maybe if you can tell me about the different approaches that you mentioned before, maybe not just posing questions, which are the approaches, the challenges maybe even that you can identify in your own practices. Because for me, for example, the big challenge is how to build an anti or a counter-colonialism in institutions that have been thought of just to create and recreate colonization. And I'm talking about public policies, which are tools for colonization. I'm talking about the economy, that is another colonization tool. And I'm talking about universities as well, which are another element for colonization. Julieta Paredes, she's a counter-colonial activist. And I get very frustrated when I was listening to her say that the academia is a colonial institution. But I understand what she means. So, I don't know, it's a challenge. And the institutions have been built to reproduce coloniality. And sometimes we are told, well, Julieta Paredes mainly says, that when we are at university talking about decolonization or counter-colonization, as a matter of fact, we are doing things in a cynical manner. You know, we are kind of, it's not fully honest. We are using the power and the space of the academia to once again colonialize knowledge, even like from a, let's say, a counter-colonial perspective. So I just wanted to listen to you, hear your comments, to see what you feel, what you think, or what are the challenges?
Thank you. I think we can
Thank
stop
you.
sharing now.
I think we
That
can
way
stop
see
sharing
each other
now.
better.
That way we can see each
Thank
other
you.
better. Thank you.
So as Nontokozo said, if anybody has any contribution, anything you want to say, any curiosity, just unmute yourself and go ahead.
I think there's already a question in the
I think there's
chat.
already a
It's
question
just,
in the chat. It's just
if it could be translated,
if it could be
that would be great.
translated, that would be great.
It is a question about the image behind Benedito, if you can tell more about that. But I don't know if that's related to what the conversation. Yes, it is. Yeah. So go ahead.
That's personal. I'm at home. You're invading my privacy. No, no, but it's not by chance. It's not just by mere chance. It's an image. As Clara was saying when we were in the breakout rooms, I'm one of these bodies that is, let's say, transitioning. And that's why I love this idea of border or borderless or border people and movement. You know, when you're thinking about colonization from historical perspective, we are always talking about the conquest of a territory and organizing things from a unifying perspective and trying to enter, to conquest the new territory. So I love this idea of movement, the transitioning, the perspectives that actually create new paths, new ways that are not just one, but several paths at the same time. So, for example, something that we talk a lot about masculinities is the new masculinities. And we say they are not new. We are talking about different masculinities, other masculinities. One of the books from, Margaret Carillia from 1998, she is a feminist from Brazil working with this topic, and we wrote this, the book was called Men and Masculinities, Other Words. And that's the idea, thinking about, colonization is closing the path, and the counter-colonialism should propose opening up new paths. And that's what I mean, that the transition. I'm sorry that I'm going all over the bush, just to say that you build new things from leaving a small city, for example, in my case, a small town in the northeast of Brazil. It was more a rural city, and then coming to a more urban city. That is a transition. I also lived in Sao Paulo, and I've also lived in Barcelona for some time after the postdoc, the post-PhD. And this piece of art is an image that, I don't know, attracted me. I was just walking down the street, and this is a production. It's an Argentine artist that I bought, me, Brazilian, in Barcelona, in Spain, walking down the street. So I don't know what she tried to reproduce, the painter, the artist, but I understand that the images are actually, it's what it sparks off. And this, what I see here is the image of a couple. Both of them are black. I don't know why the sun is white. Maybe this idea of borders or connecting from a different perspective. And I don't know, that's it. It doesn't have a true story behind it. I didn't make it myself. I would love to have the capacity, the skill to paint such a beauty. And Juan is the name of the painter. But, just a little bit of context from the image.
Thank you for sharing that.
And if you want,
No sé si hay otras
you
preguntas.
can
Quieren
also,
también puede compartir
I don't know, share
profesiones que
maybe
vosotros han
your
hecho desde
understanding
imagen
of
o
this
también de la
image
otra
when you look at
que
it,
expuse también
or
en la
your
diapositiva,
opinion
si
about
quieren
something
también.
that I shared before on the PowerPoint.
You can unmute, just unmute, and there's not so many of us today.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
But let me see if we can hear you. Vidyarata,
Yeah.
let me see if we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, as Benedito was talking, my eyes were on that image. You know, this power of the use of the art. You know, Benedito, in your presentation, you had that old image of, which you're showing from the past. And then behind you, there's this beautiful image because, it's this imagination. For me, it's this man who is looking after a child. Maybe the woman is, not well or something, and he's holding the child. Who knows, And as you're doing this presentation and speaking in very theory terms, we have here, there's another dimension which, you talked about black versus white. We have also, the indigenous and dealing with indigenous ideas and how we have to relate to, like many of us who have come to Latin America because of colonialism through slavery, and in the case of Ghana, through indentureship, or through other ways, how now in our decolonizing, how we also deal with the indigenous, and then to have on that layer. I come to this presentation just now from trying to have a discussion with an indigenous man about what I perceive as some sexism. And I know there are multiple, you talk about this, about Maria, she talks about these relations, it's how we as men relate to each other as we talk. And that is, in addition to me relating to women, different women of these different races, but also to men who are, men with disabilities, who might also have men who are indigenous, who are exploited, So these are multiple questions, but as I said, as you were speaking, the vision was there in the image behind you. So beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat. It's been translated.
Everyone can make a comment about this question. I'm going to start, but you can all make comments if you wish. So let's see. Your name is Vidyarata? Is it well pronounced? What's the name of
Vidya? Vidyart or Vidya? Yeah.
Vidyar. You can call me Vidyar. It's easier. Good. I think there is a colonial trap. Actually, modern colonial trap, I should say, because when you are talking about coloniality, we're also talking about a way to organize modernity in our countries or in our region. And this trap is very dangerous. It's trying to solve things, trying to find a path that is already, done and ready to be applied. And I think that that's very well connected among the two questions, the question or comment that she posed, and the question or comment made by Jessica. When we talk about territories, indigenous territories, for example, or population, whichever population you're talking about, in general, from a colonial perspective, we tend to think that there is a plan, organized plan to work with this group, or with this population, or with that space. And that's a very colonial way of thinking. For example, Brazil had a lot of experience in supporting work in Mozambique about HIV prevention. But the first 5 years or 10 years, let's say, that we were working there, that was very difficult because they were trying, Brazilians were trying to reproduce, the Brazilian experts, or consultants, they were trying to reproduce the way in which public policy stays in Brazil and bring it to Mozambique. And of course, it didn't work for the first 10 years. They were trying to apply tools that worked in a different territory, but when they reached Africa, they didn't work. And I think that that's very difficult because, we're always working with projects and we are building, let's say, instrumental perspectives and organizing things with budget, deadlines, order, tests, and indicators. So we are it's not only a question of language, it's the devices that we use. They are colonial devices. So when I had my first experience of getting closer to an indigenous community in Sao Paulo, it was actually in Sao Paulo, in the south, at the bottom south of the city of Sao Paulo. Tarelheiros is the name of the region. It's very poor, and there were indigenous communities there, living there as well. I was working there for 6 months in that group, and I loved it because little by little, and of course, being helped by a young man, I think he was like 15 years old and he already had 2 children. He was teaching me the way in which he answered my questions. He was trying to tell me what I wanted to hear. He was answering what he thought I wanted to hear. So the colonization processes, people who are colonized learn to say and to answer what the colonizers wish to hear. So I was watching a video. It was an experience with a community. And people say, look, when he arrived at our community, everything changed. We had this and that problems. But when they arrived, things were organized. Now we don't have these problems anymore. No, they are answering what we would like to hear. And they know how to do that. So in order to break that system, the ideal thing, my experience, or according after the 6 months that I spent there, and I thought that I had done a lot. Several workshops for HIV prevention and, dialogues about the use of alcohol and etc. I did what I had planned to do. But at the end of the day, the most important thing that I had done was to deconstruct everything that I had thought before and to try and acknowledge the specificities of that group. So listening to their specificities, it's listening to them, seeing how they move from one category to the other. That's counter-colonial. Categories are colonial. They try to create dichotomies. You are this or that. You are either this or that. You are a man or a woman. You are white. You are not black. This is the dichotomy that they create. So when we build a project, we reproduce the dichotomies very often. And I think that the way forward would be, for example, by using this image, I wouldn't go to a space saying, this image implies this and this and that, and it has this image that means this and that. Or I wouldn't read the story of Ana Juan, who is the painter. No, I'm going to say, what do you think about this image? How can you understand? How can you interpret this image? There is a Catalan author whose name is Tomás Ibáñez García. Tomás Ibáñez García. He says something that I love. When we're talking about images, we are not talking about a representation, but about a figuration. So we project in the images what our imagination allows us to think. And this is the basis to think about the colonization processes. For example, in Brazil during the 90s, there were groups of psychoanalysts that defined colonization and the construction of identity, of the Brazilian identity, as a byproduct, or let's say of the wish of the colonizers. Let's say the image of a quiet country, of a hot country, of a sexualized country, that's from the perspective, that's from the colonial perspective. It has been created from the colonizer's point of view. So that's a challenge for us. How to go through, how to move ourselves, how to transit, how to build, by not denying these constructions, but kind of like proposing a different view that are not fixed, that are moving.
Thank you for that. It's very deep. It also makes me think of many good intentional social movements that I've been involved in, that I know specifically in Europe as well, that really have the right heart and the right mindset and the right intention of decolonizing and really doing what seems to be right, and at the same time being in the danger of repeating the patterns of oppression, because we might have the right heart and the right intention, but we come so far, right, from, in the sense of we've been so deep in colonization that what does it look like to be decolonized? And it shouldn't be a one answer fits all. The context is different, right? We all have different dreams and different ways of seeing what that looks like, and it's important to make space for that. And if we do projects with people from other countries, or we are involved in collaborations with people from other spaces, is to leave that, to come with that intention of knowing that the context, first of all, the context of colonization is different, right? We are all colonized differently. And also looking at the solutions to that also need to be different and need to be diverse, and not just applying. Yeah, I always say resolving problems with the very same energy that created them in the first place. So for me, the change also happens interpersonally, right? Working with ourselves, our own internalized colonial behavior, and our communities as well. So thank you for that. Do we have any other thinking processes?
Just one thing I wanted to add to what you said. We also have to recognize the controversies and understand that we were talking, for example, when we're talking about men and masculinities from a colonial perspective, most of the times, which is we've always looked into the problems that men build for the women's lives. So this dialogue started with a feminist movement saying that men, the sufferings, the violence, and that they produce to the bodies of the women created in the house, but also in the economy, in the war, in the public spaces. So this is a feminist critique that has been a base to think about the development of women, the development of public policies or personal development. And then when in the 90s we started thinking about the other perspective of men, we did in a dichotomic way. We thought about men, what men suffer about. And there is where it gets complex, because I think that is a colonial view, whereas the buildings are created from this controversy, that meaning we see the sufferings that men are producing, but also the ones that are suffering. It's part of the same network. So the same power to create violence is the power that results in more death of men by urban violence, for example. to think about this complexity is very necessary, because if we only look into one path, it doesn't work. For example, a view in which there are no path where to get to, but where we're starting from, that's more interesting. And to start from that complexity is better than to think in a colonial way, which is one specific point of this network. I like to think it like that. And that's why we need to stop a little bit the investment on what men are suffering about, and to think in a counter-colonial way how men are part of a network that build the violence that they even suffer later on. So this would be a way to think in a more complex way. I'm sorry, my Spanish maybe is not perfect, but Magali, I just wanted to problematize something that you've just said. How to work the masculinity in men when we think about problematizing masculinity. We think, as you've said, to put it into the people that are suffering, because it's what it's been done. But the issue of masculinity is about privilege, and the hardest part is to work on that privilege, because it's felt as an attack against men. So the idea of focusing on the suffering that men might feel, it's a way to avoid thinking masculinity as a place of executing the privilege, the difference between rights and privilege, for example. I know you've thought about this, but maybe could you talk us about it a little bit? Yes, as I said, we don't have answers. What we are doing here is organizing better our doubts. And for me, it's very helpful to think masculinity from the perspective of a colonial, with a feminist, a Black feminist, who has taught things that I brought from a book, which is feminism is for all, for everybody. And she has a call saying that the feminist movement has been through a lot of paths, and it's been moving forward. And the feminist activists, including the academics, the scholars, thought that men were part of the problem. They were not the problem, and that the problem was patriarchy, sexism, and masculine domination. She said this in order to think in a complex way what this Brazilian researcher said, that sometimes we change the plan in a very fast way. We're talking about social building of masculinity. That is a base that build bodies are feminine, masculine, transgender, and it's a base that is structural and is symbolic. But when the way people feel, people reproduce the systems, that's more complex. And sometimes people try to bring from this historical plan, to take it into the daily lives of people. For example, I've seen groups of young people where maybe sometime someone would bring this representation to say, you were saying this because you belong to this and this and that, posing this person in a historical construction. and the bodies and the experiences of men. Anna Connell talks about this very well. The construction of masculinity and womanhood, none of us can read it because they are ideals, they are positions. But in our experiences, many times, how can I put it? We are in a privileged position. We don't perceive this, but we recognize that the privilege is not going to change either. It's to recognize a privilege. It's a path. It's not the end point. But many times the experiences come back. For example, for a Black man to say that you're a man, but from the image I showed you in colonialism, how he wasn't even human. How had he recognized himself as man? In Spanish, we use disability, which is something I don't like. It's a person that has different capacities. It has a deficiency. It's a person that has a deficiency. I don't like to use that word, but how we hear these people, we did in our seminar, the person that has a discapacity, it's always with people that had to be taken care of. We cannot think about this person as a person that can take care of somebody else. And it was a person that had a discapacity. How can we think about something that is not a body of a man? Because masculinity is a perspective that we cannot read from all perspectives. So the complex thing is how to discuss these topics of categories that organize public policies, that organize the institutions, the more formal institutions, but how we're going to think the institutions on the daily life, on the family institution, these friendships. These are also institutional categories that are organized from this institutionalized way, but in a very different way. And I think these are plans. So I'm coming back to the idea of the plan of Hosenberg, how we are trying to talk, for example, the identity categories. We need to talk about identity categories. We need to talk about movements. But but these changes, the people might need wider horizons, and not to think that we've been born to be something. But institutions try to control this all the time. So on the public dialogue, we have to speak in a specific way. And many times we need to dispute this between categories. But in a daily life, the groups, these categories do not work.
I'm left with the sensation that I would like to go deeper into the subject. It's really like I can feel it in my stomach. I think when it all started was just the sense of, I don't know, I'm also having a little bit of sadness in me. I think, yes, of course, men have more privileges. Systemically, men have privileges, right? They hold a place of power. And I think we know that. And also, I'm just having this sense of, I just had this feeling like in all of that, how do we love our men? How do we raise our boys that they feel lovable, that they feel part of our communities, and that they don't feel that we constantly putting the burden of colonial behavior on just them and making it just their responsibility? And how do we bring them back into being part of really our communities? And I don't know, I'm just having this sense of the village, right? How did villages function before colonization? How did the system function? You know, the balance of everybody having their place and knowing their place. So for me, that's what's coming up for me. Looking beyond just the intellectual and the systemic way into finding these solutions, not just talking about rights and policies on paper, but also talking about the well-being holistically of our communities, which really involves the healing and the loving of men, of masculinity, and not just focusing on the toxic. Yeah, I have the name of Bell Hooks written down, so maybe she's also trying to speak through to come through as well. So, do we have any other comments? And anything else? We are, I think we could, if there's nothing else, we can take a break maybe and then come back. If there's nothing else that's coming up or any other questions. Yeah.
Just a very brief comment. I like very much the idea of love as a political action and not the romantic love, because that is colonial. But love as the possibility of bonding, of building equal relationships, and the possibility of dealing with power from a constructive perspective and not a destructive perspective. But sometimes when we look into a path, and this is a path that I like very much, Sabic, which is to search how people change things, because institutions take a long time to change things. The times are really long. So I like to think that people can deal with other ways of thinking and building daily life. But I'd like to show you very briefly a very short narrative of an experience I had working with a woman that is a sexual worker in my city for many, many years from the dictatorship in our country. She's been working for more than 30 years with sexual work and with women. And in the government of Lula, the first government of Lula, there were a lot of actions to support these women, not by judging if it's right or wrong, but to give the women the right in the way they want to work with their bodies. And they say they are sexual workers and they are aware of the violence they endure, but also of the paths they build from a autonomy perspective. And this is what the government supported. And there were programs and campaigns. But when there was a dictatorship, the coup d'etat in Brazil against Dilma, the President Dilma, that what happened was that the president that started after that stopped all this campaign and all the support for sexual workers. And a week after that, I met this woman that is a leader among the sexual workers in Brazil, and she was crying. She was crying a lot. She was suffering from the impact of this intervention. And I didn't understand. I thought that something that the government does wouldn't have so much effect on her life. But she said, and this is a summary that helped me to think that we cannot exclude the views. What she said was, when the government promotes something, things are not going to change. They're not going to change the way we live things in a positive way. I mean, for example, if there's a campaign in the government, it doesn't really change my life. A public policy is not going to change my life directly, but the government can really make my life more complex. These institutions are tools of repression. So public policies are to control, to regulate the population. So to have in a public policy a campaign that says that sexual work is a right for these women, it's a way not to make people think in the same way, but they're going to reproduce more violence within this institution. What she said is that when I go to a bar, for example, there's a poster of government campaign saying that it's a right for women and men to do whatever they want with their bodies, I feel stronger to keep on doing my work. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to get here. It's not that the government can really create the change, the positive change, but if there is a positive message, then the negative part is not going to be reproduced so much. It's a little bit complex what I'm saying, perhaps. In Portuguese, there's an expression, if Magali helps me, it's an expression in Portuguese that violence produces more violence. So if it's not producing violence, that's already quite good. I think our view for the public policies is not that they can change the lives of people, but they can stop reproducing violence. It's almost as an agreement.
It seems it's hard to go to a break, right? Because we only just left.
Because I was just also thinking that we have less than 30 minutes left.
Yes, there's no point. We apologize. There's no, so maybe we just find ways to, I'm not even sure how to, if there's any pressing, I mean, there is a question in the chat, and we also wanted to just talk a little bit about, summarize a little bit more about the past series and what are the next steps. So I don't know how much time do we need for that. I'm not quite sure. Do we need much time, or should we continue?
No.
Yeah, but okay. I think we.
Yeah, we can continue this conversation, and I would love to hear more from others as well who are here, who have been part of the conversation since the beginning today, or maybe even previous sessions. And yeah, please do just unmute yourself and share what's on your mind. It would be wonderful to hear from more of you.
Entiendo que esa es la última sesión, ¿no? Que han tenido, creo que 4 antes. Entonces creo que la invitación es también para dialogar sobre la construcción de las 5 sesiones, ¿no? Para hacer un cierre interesante. Estoy solo ayudando un poquito más a invitarles a hablar.
Yes, today people are quiet.
Yeah, without trying to put people on the spot, I was wondering, but if you don't want to, don't have to. Alice, if you want to say anything, because I know you've been to others. So, yeah.
I've been walking around picking up my kid, and so listening, but not all the time listening super attentively, but listening in. And so what I take with me, I think, is trying to be practical about everything. So trying to kind of I don't know, to find the moments in at every point, to try to deconstruct power relations and to kind of find equality. Perhaps it sounds like cliches, but I know you understand what I mean. So and to try to find that all the time. I take also with me that I mean, the notion of humans can change, and that we need to kind of, I don't know, sometimes the institutions will change too. So so try to change the institutions, but also try to change what we have with each other, like, all the time. So I'm somewhere there. So thank you for the conversation.
Yeah, I'd
Please
like to
just
share
Thank you.
share some thoughts. I'm gonna give this a try. So as I was listening to you, Benedito, earlier, conceptualizing coloniality, what came to, and you asked a question about, or like something that you struggle with, how can institutions that are colonial and historically colonial now be part of decolonizing? And what came to mind is the importance of localizing ourselves. So if coloniality is also about locality and where you are positioned, so really we all have to do our own work, I think, as individuals, to localize ourselves in the systems of power and oppression. So looking at our privileges, where it's racial privilege or gender privilege or age privilege or any of those, just to position ourselves. And then I thought that it's also very important for the institutions to do that and to face their history. And I was thinking about colonial history in the Netherlands as you were speaking, that I think that the Netherlands as a country, the institutions haven't faced that history, haven't localized actually ourselves and themselves in the history and where we stand in all of those different systems of oppression. And so to now do some specific acts to decolonize, it's important, but it's only a start unless the institutions are willing to really look within themselves and transform the way they operate. And it made me think about MenEngage Alliance as an institution, and how we also have to do the work of localizing ourselves in our own history and in the history of the feminist movement and in the history of all these movements, the big social justice, human rights movement that we're wanting to be part of. And that positioning ourselves and really looking at our history, where do we come from, is an important step in order to inform our actions going forward. That's what came to mind. Thank you.
Johnny, I loved this idea of thinking about institutions, and there's another author called Donna Haraway. I think that you must have read something written by her. She has an idea that I like a lot: how to fight from within the stomach of the monster. It's a perfect metaphor to think that sometimes when we are talking about institutions that they are already big monsters, let's say, and they produce and reproduce the ways in which they know, in which they do, so that's why it's so important and so difficult, because we are within an institution trying to make a change from inside out. But there is another expression that I also like from Michel Foucault, when she said, when they say, whenever there is power, there is resistance. So they are saying that the institutions are not a monolithic body. Those are controversial bodies or agencies. And there are paths to create a change, to bring about a change. For example, in art, what would be left of art without an institution, for example? Because we also need an institution to bring that forward. Education is another path or another way forward. When I'm in my class, I try to produce changes, not for, not for the kids to get to know exactly what I learned or my same knowledge, because that would be a colonial way of approaching that, imposing knowledge on them, but a space of learning for ourselves, for myself as a teacher in this case. And when all of us who are sharing this space now, when we are producing a change, maybe the first path would be the change that this brought about in our own lives. What change or changes has it created in our own lives? Because that's the way maybe in which we can understand the changes that can be brought about to others without making any idealization or romanticizing this idea of the pre-colonial, because I'm hearing that a lot from friends from Mozambique. For example, they are saying colonization, the pre-colonial process or era, you don't have to idealize that either, because there were, and that they continue talking about, these traditions of reproducing violence and gender violence a lot, where women could not be, in a certain power position, where they couldn't have access to certain things or do certain practices that are only for men or were only for men in the spaces of power. So that's not a trap that we need to be aware of. Talking about counter-coloniality doesn't mean that pre-colonial times were, we need to go back to pre-colonial times, that that's the way forward. No, because we are talking about ancestrality a lot. Okay, in some cases, that can be a different way of colonializing again. I'm talking a lot about this dialogue between feminism, African feminism, plural feminism, from an American and African perspective. As I'm African, which is like the mixture between American and African from an African perspective. Benedito, I loved that part where you mentioned, well, in one of our series, I think it was the third or the fourth session, where Aurea was making a presentation, and she's a woman from Guatemala. She is from the academia, but she has worked together with indigenous women in Guatemala, and she rescued that same thing. She said, it's not a question of imagining that the decolonization process implies going back to what life was like before. The autochthonous peoples before colonization. So not idealizing any of that. It was not wonderful. What it actually means is not to continue controlling or setting restrictions about how the indigenous peoples should live, and giving them the space, the conditions, so that they can reinvent themselves in the way they want. So that's the point. It's not going back to the past. It's removing all the limitations, all the restrictions that hinder and their possibility to exert their autonomy and to determine themselves as they wish.
Anna.
Yeah, Benedito, what was the last name? Qual era o último, o sobrenome de uma autora que você citou?
When I was talking about wars, which author? Now, at the very end, the very end, the last intervention, I think it was the last, oh, I'm sorry, my memory. I mean, my memory is just like, I do apologize.
From fighting the belly within the beast.
Yes. Whenever.
Yes. Let me write it down. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I think, yeah, we just have a few minutes now, so maybe we can just wrap up things. And before we do that, I just want to say a deep gratitude to you, Benedito, for coming today and for your presentation and the discussions. Very, for me at least, it was very rich, and it leaves me with a sense of wanting to go deep also. I mean, there's also was a question about alcohol and masculinity in Brazil. So there's so many paths, as you were saying, so many things that we can tap on, that we need to tap on and talk about them, the complexities, and start from there, and find our way to wherever we want to be, wherever we dream and wish to be together. I don't know. So thank you so much for taking the time. And maybe we can have you some other time again to go deeper into this. And I don't know, Magdalene, do we have anything to say? You are muted.
Yeah. I don't know, Yoni, if you want to say anything. If we were going to share some very brief notes from the previous sessions, but I don't know if we need it. I think we retouched on them all. We will be systematizing all the notes that, and we're having a consultant look at all the recordings from the full series, and then try to share with everybody. So maybe we can wait until then. So we will get back to you. But if you have any other thoughts or ideas of how to continue this conversation moving forward, we finished this first series of 6 to touch, superficially as much as we could, with support from Nontokozo, but as she had said, we're not ending our interest and the need for this conversation moving forward. It's just that it's going to take shape either as part of other conversations. How do we incorporate the lens of decoloniality into other discussions when we talk about other issues, or in any other way. So any suggestions, recommendations, ideas that you have, please let us know. We'd be happy to pull that together and see what we can come up with, within the possibilities. Yoni, any words of wisdom before we close?
No, to emphasize what Magali, what you said, that we would love to hear thoughts from all of you on what next steps can be, because this for us was definitely just the start of a conversation within MenEngage Alliance, and maybe to emphasize that actually working to decolonize our own work is one of the core principles that we have now articulated for ourselves. So you will recall that we updated those last year, and yeah, the commitment to decolonize our own practices, our own alliance, and in the work that we do with partners in the broader feminist movement is there. So this will continue to be part of our journey, and I think we would all love to hear what you will be doing in your own work to carry it forward, and what we can do in the collective work, and what we facilitate from the Global Secretariat, how we can support that this further catches root within the Alliance's work. So any thoughts that you have to share here or later in follow-up messages, we're here. We would love to hear them. We know MenEngage Europe is also continuing the conversation in their own context. Yeah, we would love to hear other activities as well that MenEngage members that you all are conducting. And thank you for joining, and thank you to Benedito for what you shared today. Very insightful, a lot of more food for thought. And thank you, Nontokozo, so much for being our facilitator through this journey and bringing so much of your own wisdom and your gentle facilitation into the process. Very much appreciated. Learned a lot from you as well.
Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thanks
and I
indeed
hope
for
we
the
have some
invitation.
other
I hope,
possibilities to
we'll have
keep on
more possibilities to
talking.
continue
And also,
talking,
we
creating
have
this
again
dialogue.
the
And once
invitation
again, I
for
repeat just the
tomorrow.
invitation for you. I mean, the
timing, it's a
schedule
little
is
bit
different, the
difficult
timetables,
because of the time
but,
difference.
well,
But
in Brazil,
it will be 4
in the
p.m.
afternoon.
tomorrow.
I'm going to send
Magali
the
information about this talk that is very related to the topic we've had today. She's a researcher and activist, Mara Viveros. She's an anthropologist, and she wrote the book, The Colors of Masculinity. I think it's going to be very interesting, and it's an action from us, from MenEngage Brazil and MenEngage Latin America, and also an exchange with the Ministry of Health of Brazil on the area of men health. So thank you so much, Magali, Johnny, Nontokozo. I loved your hat, Nontokozo, and see you all soon.
Thank you so much, Benedito, for giving us your time. And yeah, I also want to say thank you to the people who are not here, who also we were organizing together these spaces. Okay, my mind just went blank. Bianca and Jenny, we're also part of the organizing, and also the people who just keep showing up. It's really important that people show up and that we take this journey together, right? So thank you so much from different parts of the world, that you show your commitment, and that this discussion should continue in your own regions, in your own way, and how you see how decolonization should happen in your own regions, and bring those ideas and let's hear them. Thank you so much. Have a good day or good evening wherever you are in the world. Thank you.